Hey, there we go. Seems we had a blip in the matrix. Okay, that was weird. Okay. Well, I guess let's continue. Okay. Where did we leave off? What was the last thing that you heard, Jordan? Okay. Dev dependencies. So we've got Prettier does our formatting. Yep. Cypress using testing for our forms mostly. We might end up. I suspect that we'll probably do more snapshot sort of testing for D3. But for right now, we mostly just have Cypress doing our tests of the forms. And then we've got unit tests for more of the low-level function kind of stuff. And we have a few shared components that are tested with that React test renderer, which is mostly doing snapshots of the React components. And I believe the React team does recommend not to use that anymore. So we might end up switching off of that. I believe they're recommending the React testing library now, which is same group that did this Cypress plugin. Have you used Cypress at all, Jordan? We can give you a quick show of that. Looks like we got everything up to date. Okay, so we've got a little bit of experience with it though. Basically what it ends up doing is you write tests and it will go through and do those user functions for you. And the reason that I like this React testing library, or excuse me, the testing library from the Cypress plugin for that, is we get something that, what would be a good one? Maybe transactions. We get something that I think reads really well, and it ties more to how the user is going to be looking at it. So the big thing behind it is finding pieces of the DOM by text. So we do scope it a little bit here, just because I've got these kind of very separate components. So my assumption is that within the scope of the tab, we're kind of picking things based on what the user would see. So the user is going to see a label for value, and they're going to then type into the box next to that. And I think that really helps because when you break your tests, it means that you're changing something for what the user is going to see. So it sort of aligns the dev pane with the user pane. When you start breaking a whole bunch of tests, it means you're changing stuff around quite a bit, and the user is going to have to readjust as well. So I like that thinking because it sort of aligns those two interests. And that's the testing library is I think it was started by Ken C. Dodds. So he's done quite a good amount of content on that, as well as working on these different libraries. Yeah, it really. I think that's something that he definitely highlights in his blog posts and whatnot. That there's the reason that they go in that direction is that if you're controlling and doing your tests based on some random ID within your DOM, that isn't going to be how the user is navigating. So it works, but when you're doing your tests, the idea, especially behind these end-to-end tests, is to, from a user perspective, go through and run these functions. So if you're having to write a whole bunch of boilerplate to get this thing tested, that's sort of signaling that maybe you need to come back and revisit that, because the user is also having to click through and do all those things just to get whatever they need done. So I really like the thinking behind it. And as I switched to using this library, I feel like it did sort of help me think about and think through that whole process. Okay, well, let's look. We can run a quick Cypress thing. We can see what we're talking about a little bit here. So we'll open a little browser window and run through a whole bunch of tests for you. You can, for those unfamiliar, you can always look at the videos or whatnot, but I think it's probably going to be useful if it doesn't take forever to run through one of the tests. Speaking of taking forever. Okay, well, we'll let that open. And it can run Chrome headless. So I actually have this running in my CI. And I think at this point we're actually completely switched over to using GitHub Actions on this. So it will run, when you push or whatever, it will run a Cypress test and show you if anything broke. And it'll actually drop videos into the comment on the PR if anything actually did break in the test, which is really cool to see. And you can go back and play those actual videos too. So basically what it's going to go through, it's going to run through all the different steps that we have written into it. And it's a heck of a lot better than testing that manually every single time. I know when I first started out, I was hand testing those forms, and anytime you change anything, there was a pretty big potential for you to break something. So it was nice to, I'm glad that I went through the effort to put it in, because it's helpful now. Okay. So we've got our server started. Let's go ahead and open up a page. We are localhost. Whoop. I accidentally clicked enter. Okay, localhost 3000. So I think what we want to do is we want to add a budget page, and we'll sort of start feeling that out. I think what I'm going to do is copy one of these. Maybe I'll copy this page. It's not a terrible one to copy. I think we'll call it budget. Even though I said before I feel like that probably brings baggage with it. When somebody sees that there's already some established idea behind what a budget entails. But we'll run with it for now. A lot of these are actually class components still. I started this before hooks were a thing. So I think as we sort of work on this, we'll probably slowly convert these things to hooks. I prefer them to the old class components. And it's not too much work to actually go through the process to convert these, especially if our state stuff isn't too ingrained into it. So as far as the state goes, we actually do a combination of context, local state, and putting state in the microstates. So when you're changing the formic actually deals with the state internally, and we don't drop that into our global state until somebody submits that. And that helps cut down on the thrashing of state. So we're not changing the whole global state every time somebody clicks a key, or presses a key rather. Okay. So the state is dropped in through the context. That might be fine actually. We probably don't need this fragment here anymore. I think what we'll end up doing is, I guess let's look at the different components, and maybe we'll think about the sort of higher level layout of what we want this to look like. So I think traditionally you would see a budget in more of a list type of view. But if we're focusing on effectively infinite composability, I think that starts to break that assumption. And if anybody has any thoughts, please don't be scared to mention anything. I'm figuring this out as I go, and I'm always happy to hear input. But I think the main containers that at least I sort of think about are, it's either going to go in a flex or it's going to go in a grid. I don't think there's really anything else that makes sense to try to put it into. I think we're going to end up going with flex, because we can always do, we can look at a column and we can flex the stuff in the column direction, I guess you'd say. And we can potentially deal with that infinite nesting with something like padding. Which may become an issue after a couple of levels, but let's start working out what that's going to look like. So if we switch this to flex, we don't have columns anymore. I think we'll probably want to, we could probably grab from the cash flow to populate some of the data. Where would that be? Flow. Probably not very well named. So this is actually using, we made a table from flex. So this is actually using a transaction table which does flex to drop all of this in there. And it's using a flex table component, which is a shared thing. Do we put that in there right away? I think we're going to do more of a... I think it's not quite as approachable to have sort of a spreadsheet view. I think there's probably some prior feelings about spreadsheets and them being overwhelming. I know if you talk to my wife, she never wants to look at spreadsheets. I'm definitely the spreadsheet person of between the two of us. So I think we'll probably focus more on like a card, which I guess as I say that, there is a card piece. But I think we'll end up focusing more on a card kind of layout. Can we get a different... okay. I think we'll probably focus more on that. And we could potentially do 2 columns. So we've got, in this det, we switched that up a little bit. So I think maybe we do cards, and the cards will be a higher level item. And the I'll go ahead and copy this right away though. The higher level item will be how should we deal with that? We can do maybe I'm thinking we can maybe do the left column as expenses and the right column as income, but I feel like it probably makes more sense to group them vertically and have maybe 2 or 3 cards wide, and each card has an expense group in it, and have a section for income and a section for expenses. Which means, so as it is right now, our expenses aren't. They're one big blob. So we'll need to do some filtering, of which we have. We have some of that filtering set up already. So we can go ahead and grab this, and I think what we'll end up having is the grid. Okay, we're gonna I'm liking the vertical thing, so I think we're gonna have 2 boxes. We'll have a boxes section, and we'll have one for expenses, and we're going to do the same for income. So this is going to give us an array, and we can then map over that array. And this will be a transaction. And that will return to us a component. So each of these is going to be within this section, it's going to be, so this is all normalized. So we don't have it all grouped yet. So we'll probably need to do some grouping for the composability part of it. But for right now, let's just do a list. So we'll say for each transaction, we're going to have array that also gets mapped over. And that array will contain all of our transaction information. The R account is the real account that it's attached to. So like if you were getting a paycheck, the real account, or the account, would basically be the money that the account is going into. Or excuse me, yep. It's the account that the money is going into. Description is just to help you remember category, and type would be income, category would be like rent or something like that. That's sort of the top level categories. So maybe actually that might be, we can do a unique grouping based on the category, and maybe that's our first top level thing, and then from there we can break it out into more disparate composable pieces. So we're going to want to map over all of our data. It's on transaction. And I think we're just going to drop it in text right now. And we're going to do something similar for the account. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit smaller so we can see what we're working with here. A little bit less information, but heading out for the night. Jordan. Cool. Well, I was glad to have you around. I will chat with you tomorrow. Sleep well. Okay, map value to text. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Oh, we do need to add this to our index. Oh, this one. To get the path stuff set up. So I think what we're going to end up having is a budget path equals, we'll just call it budget for right now. I feel like I'm going to want to change that in the future, but import budget from pages/budget. Okay, get hair in my face, I think. Okay. I'm not quite sure why these are. Oh, that's kind of cool. So based on the type of export. Nifty. Unexpected empty object pattern on line 5. Oop. Okay. The props. What do we need? What's our top level in here? We don't really use this much, so we might not actually need anything. So I think we'll just do that for right now, because most of what we're getting, we're not prop drilling at all or pushing props anywhere. For the most part, we're relying on context to deliver props to the right place. because most of the props are coming from the global state. Okay, so we've got that all set up. We want to put it on the home page, which would be in header. Oh, and state. Comment, I believe. Header. Yep. Budget. Okay. So if we pull some of our more involved data, we get an error. Okay, so if we don't have an expense, is that what is giving us the error? So what we can do here is, well, if we have a transaction, we'll filter down to, if we potentially filter down to nothing, so if we don't have any expenses, for example, we want to deal with that, but we've kind of got that filter built in. So if map doesn't have I feel like there's not a good way to exit out. If the way that's written, that filter, there's not a good way to exit out of that. We may actually want to consider moving that filter into the state, so that's something we can just access there. Because it's trying to find two fixed of these values which don't exist. So if we just did something like that, I think it's specifically, wait, oh, no. Okay, so here we're doing expense. Here we're doing income. This should match. Yeah. So this should be exactly the same, except for that should be expenses. I should not have done the accounts here. Expense. Okay. So we're getting something. And we do want to edit. We'll switch this to an SX MX. Now I gotta remember my flex. Flex direction should be column. Okay. See, now that's gonna get annoying. I wish there was a way to hot reload but not reset the actual state. So we'll have to look at that at some point. So we do have everything in there. It's dumping all the data for us. These text, they come in. So if we would switch these to be a span, it would show up right next to each other. So that would basically be very similar to the layout that we see on the tables. Let's see. It's starting to get kind of late. Where do we want to have kind of stopping point do we want to have? Where are we looking? Okay. So it looks like we've got about 30 minutes. Oh, because it restarted. Yep. Okay. We're gonna have two separate pieces for this one, but so we've been going for a little bit over an hour. We've sort of got this started. I think we'll probably let's drop this into cards. Put each one of these into a card, and then I think we might begin to good stop a point. That card. We're gonna not have a span for our text. We'll be grouping it based on the card. And I don't think we're gonna be able to, we might need to adjust our theme to have that shadow. We can probably just deal this real quick here. We are going to adjust our theme and add that to our theme. So buttons, variants, styles, so since that's the primary, it should use that by default. Yep. So if we go, I think we've got some padding built in, or margin maybe. If we, actually we don't. Okay. Let's do sx equals, whoop, it'll be margin between them. And we'll go with 5. Feels pretty decent. Put on both of these. right now we've got a section for each one of these. And we sort of want these to be next to each other. So if we look at the CSS, what do we have going on here? I suspect we'll probably want to make each one of these basically make each one of these sections a flex as well. But actually, let's use a grid for that. Flexbox grid. So that'll let us do some of the spacing stuff in between them. Yep. Then we don't need to do padding or anything like that. Take this out. Take this out. So we can say grid, columns equals, I think we'll say 3 columns. Well, we actually want that to be responsive. I think we're probably going to go down to 1. Which one's first? I think the big one's first. So 3, 2, 1 maybe? No, it's gross. Seems like we've got an issue with their prettier, so it is not doing the formatting for us. Let's take a look at that quick. What's our problem? Oh. Close. Okay. So we've got a grid. Let's make sure we are using, okay, so we set either a gap, so we set the columns in the gap, or we set, I might actually have my columns flip-flopped around. Let's switch all of these to 3 for now. That looks much better. Okay. So we should get this kind of card layout, which will be nice. And I think we want in each one of these a heading. So we'll say income and expenses. And that'll give us our natural separation. I don't feel like we need these to be H1s, so we'll say as H2. Because you should only really need one H1. That's still pretty big. I might just need to adjust my font sizes and stuff. Okay, so if we've got so the biggest one is the one on the right. So we want to have this to be 3 or 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's right. And that. So we're going to need to do some grouping with our data to group these into the certain cards, and then I think we're going to need to figure out some of the nesting stuff. And that might end up determining, because here we force the number of columns. We might want to think about using width instead. But I think that's probably good for now. We'll think about that some more, and this is probably where we'll pick up next time, and we'll just keep slowly working through what this budget stuff should look like. After we show the data here, we're probably going to want to pull out this entering of the data on a separate page as well. So the cash flow will just be its own separate page. Okay. That's, well, we don't need to worry about committing stuff. Okay. I think we are probably good for the night. We'll see if there's anybody that is available. And we don't got anybody. It's getting kind of late for everyone. So I think we're just going to end the stream. I was glad to have everybody. Have a nice night. There we go. Bye-bye.